You see, when I say I speak something into your life, I simply mean I say the words. And because of the association you have with the words, the language you hold that thought while I'm speaking it. Now, you might reject the thought, in which case, well, it's not living with you, is it? You may, on the other hand, accept the thought, in which case that's what you're living. And by living, I mean that's what your mind is conscious of. Now, you might be ill, and I speak healing. And you're very clear in your mind, no, I'm thinking illness. I've got this disease. Look at this. Look at this appearance on my skin, or I tell you, I feel the pain. And I say, no, you don't. I mean, for a tiny instant while I say it, you might just, and then reject it fast, because the bulk of your thoughts are, no, I have a pain. I wasn't aware of consciously seeking this pain. I've come upon it, and it's still here. You don't realize you are master of the show. It's like when you're in a dream, you've no idea you're the one dreaming it. You think this is reality happening to you, and you're driven along with it, and it could be lovely, it could be frightening. It depends on how you are running the dream. It's just that you don't know you're running the dream. And your experience has been so much that you're not. You're so used to being convinced that you're not running the dream that it's not there. Your ability to run it, I mean. You're stuck with the dream. You see, it's all thought. The foundation of what you see as reality is in fact thought. The thought that you are channeling to your consciousness at present. So we might come across a person in delusion or a madman, and we're holding this reality, and he's holding a quite different reality. He thinks he's the Queen of Sheba, and he's living in that reality which seems to contradict the reality that we're holding. And we're holding it in common, so he's the odd one out, and therefore, by definition, he's therefore the one in delusion. What do you see as reality? You see as reality the view that you hold continuously, changing, but in a specified way from one time to another. This is the dream you constantly return to, and you label this one reality. As I've said elsewhere, there will come a time, of course, when you no longer return to this, and this time of this earth will not be your reality. It will either be a different reality or nothing at all, and you're not sure yet. Because, for instance, when you're asleep, there seems to be long periods of time when you wake up where you had no reality. There was no dream. There was just blankness. You jumped from one, you went to bed at 10 and you woke up at 7 and don't remember much in the way of dreams, a few odd ones perhaps not. Or you may have had a great deal of dreams of what we might call a disturbed night, or perhaps you had a wonderful night dreaming of paradise. If you don't have memory of it, well, it's as if it was not there. But was it there? But just you've forgotten it? Well, you don't know. There's no evidence of it. You might have had some sort of measuring device that showed the activity of the brain that's associated with a lot of thought, and perhaps that registers a lot of action during the night. But perhaps you can't remember that, and you certainly can't remember the details of the thoughts, and perhaps they weren't consistent enough to remember as a dream. Perhaps they were and you just didn't register them as memory. We take it that because I constantly return to this reality, this dream, this is reality. I might have other dreams I frequently return to, which might trouble me or bless me. I may constantly tell myself, they're dreams, and therefore dismiss them. And perhaps I dismiss them even when I'm actually dreaming them. I go, I know this is reality. Now, we, as what we take to be normal individuals, hold this as reality, what we're dreaming here. And people that don't hold this reality that we're in common holding here tend to exit from this reality quite quickly. They foolishly step under a bus, or they do things that are harmful to themselves, thinking it's good. And they quite simply die. They stop experiencing this reality. They might exit it in quite a painful way, a confusion of things that are not harmonious at all, as this reality is dismembered and disembodied and just taken apart, demolished. The demolishing might be painful. It might be thought to be quite peaceful. Fell asleep and drifted off into nothing, as you do each night at some point. It's no big deal. It could be that you spent hours in pain and suffering before you fell asleep. And then, you fell asleep when the body became exhausted and, one could say it couldn't maintain this level of suffering any longer. It just needed a rest from it, and so it switched off. And you slept. And you may not have woken up from the sleep, in which case they say, oh, look, not only did his breathing become quiet, but it stopped. And his heart stopped. It didn't just quieten down, it stopped. Oh, we can't get it going again. Oh, he did. So living normally is holding a complex pattern of belief, of thinking, and returning to it regularly each day, so to speak. And it seems to be one that's consistent with those around us. If it were not, those around us would be constantly demolishing the dream that we have, because they would be contributing thoughts and words inconsistent with what you're seeing, feeling, experiencing. And the two would, if you like, destroy each other. We change society by what we say, and what society says changes what we think too and become. So choosing good company is actually more fundamental than anything else. In a sense, we start with good company, parents that care for us. If we don't start with parents that care for us, and we're just left with random experiences, so to speak, that other people's enduring view around us, well, we don't last very long, because nobody looked after us. So Mum sings to a bubby and talks and chatters away to him, and leads him in thoughts that, "Are you a lovely boy? Come on then, you're going to have tea. You're gonna, time for you to feed, love. Oh, you're upset. You don't need to be upset. I'm here, your warmth and comfort. Now, have something to eat, or drink, I suppose. Rock you, sing to you, constantly feeding in a particular pattern of thought, which the child latches onto. It starts to become familiar, identifies with. This is reality, this is the good bit, this is Mum. And when Mum's not there, this is not the good bit. I want this reality. As you start to absorb Mum's pattern of consciousness. And in the way that she wishes to see you, how harmful it is then to be with people that wish to see you in a different way. I have an ex-wife who wants to see me as evil. And it has a bad effect on me. I'm best if I keep away from her. She thinks she's best if she keeps away from me too at times, except when she enjoys changing me for the worse. So, unless I'm really winning in this game, it's best to move away, isn't it? And I do, sometimes at her request, her insistence, and sometimes just for self-preservation. So we're drawn to relating to those that we're in harmony with and avoiding those that we're not. This is a very basic, elementary way of gravitating towards what we understand to be good and keeping ourselves away from that which we understand to be bad. And we might find on experience that we're wrong. This thing that we thought is good is quite harmful. Oh, we'll be careful of this in future then. People that say these things or act in this way. And we may find other things, surprisingly, well, he seemed bad, but my goodness, I was in difficulty and he came to my rescue. The Good Samaritan. How should I be towards him? Oh, goodness, I feel grateful. I want to help him all I can. How can I be helpful to him? And of course, our being helpful to others, endears ourselves to them, just as you are endeared to or repelled by people accordingly. It's a very simple mechanism that's going on, and not just at the personal level. Certain environments, laying in the sun too long doesn't do us any good, so we start to get repelled by strong sunlight. Or wet weather that gives us colds and chills, and the body's not comfortable. We seek good environments and avoid bad ones. We seek those environments that support what we see as comfortable and good, and company accordingly too, and avoid those that do the opposite. We find, of course, that our behaviour affects the effect of environments, moving to them, moving away, and also affects what people do in response. So if I tend to avoid you, you might feel hurt, and therefore not be very loving to me when I do meet you. So I then think, well, perhaps there's a way of not so much avoiding them, but avoiding the disastrous things that they say or do. So I meet you in a polite, civilized way, where the terms are well specified, the behaviour is in check by some norms and expectations of our society or our group. I take on a pattern of behaviour that seems to elicit the best that I can achieve from knowing you and avoid the difficulties. A disastrous relationship is where I cut off altogether, and I don't seem to be able to be a blessing to you that's appreciated, and I don't seem to appreciate much that you sent to me either, so it's just best to avoid you. And perhaps the feeling becomes mutual quite quickly. We become enemies in a sense, but since we're not in each other's spaces, we're not particularly involved in, if you like, crushing each other. We're just avoiding each other. We might be compelled by circumstances to be in each other's company, and then the tolerance might wear very thin indeed, and we're at war and fighting and feuding and harming each other quite deliberately in order to try and encourage the other to stay away, for instance. We're using threatening behaviour. Do that again, come near me in that way and I'll bash you. A sort of primitive response, isn't it, in the extreme. And civilized individuals try to find ways of not letting it get to this, so that we take the pressure off by being at a more acceptable distance, acceptable to both parties. Okay, so much for the obvious. What about the less obvious? I mean, how about if I preoccupy my mind with the perfect being, God? It's perfect from my point of view, of course. You know, he's friendly to me and he loves me. I mean, if he hates me, it's not a good God to be in the company of. So I meditate upon and think upon all the goodness of God, all the things that I value about God. You know, I've decided he's a person of integrity and kindness and faithfulness, true, honest, open, helpful, loving, peaceful, joyful, encouraging, always there to help, understands all, capable. You know, I've attributed wonderful things to him, and I start to increasingly live in the reality of his being. My thoughts are constantly gravitating to this individual and all his goodness, and all his goodness in particular in what he purposes, and ably so, for me. You see, my living, my consciousness is being transformed by a very conscious act. I'm worshipping God. Now, it's important then to be worshipping your God, the one that loves you, not the one that loves him to the cost of you. So the king would like you to love his God, and his God very much has the king in mind and less of you. He might treat you as cannon fodder when it comes to settling disputes with neighbouring kings. So it's very important for your welfare and happiness that your God is not the same as the king's God, unless the king happens to be an incredible saint who absolutely loves and adores all his citizens. He may not do, he might be quite a normally selfish individual. Normal for our experience in this reality as we find we're in. In fact, he may be assumed to be as selfish as yourself, in which case you're very concerned about following his God, you'd rather follow yours. And he's trying to impose his God on you by saying, if you don't worship me or my God, we'll excommunicate you, we'll stone you to death, or, you know, whatever else seems to be to hand to deal with the situation as he sees it. So if you're convinced you're in this sort of situation, it might be best that you worship your God in great privacy. Don't let on what your God is, or he may see this as very threatening and act accordingly, as far as you can see in your consciousness. Now, consciousness may not be as individualistic as we're assuming. In other words, if I take a spatial model for the moment, those people nearest to me, what they're thinking greatly affects what I'm thinking. if they're all holding the view that I'm a wicked, evil person, even I start to believe I'm this wicked, evil person at odds with them, and I'm living accordingly. Hence, where we said early on, very important that you're able to choose the best company. Where you can, do so. Where you can't, well, you can't. But you might be able to do it mentally even so, in that you're more preoccupied with the presence of God than this demon that's before you, torturing you at the moment. It's the Jesus thing, isn't it? Whatever you powerfully believe in your mind, it will come to pass. You say to this mountain, be moved into the sea, and not doubt it. You can have a thought presence that's stronger than any other thought presence to you. You're translated into heaven, the others just see you as having died. Or even they're wiped out, and you've got the good outcome that you held that your God was giving you. So this battle is spiritual, and by spiritual I mean, in this context, in this model, of thought. We're playing a battle for the mind. The powers that be around us would like to control our mind. We would rather it was controlled for the best as we understand it. There is a tension in that regard. So we choose environments where we get nearer our solution than theirs, if we can. And part of that choice of environment is not simply spatial, but the extent to which we can hold the thought more strongly than they are holding it. Now they may be many and we alone, singular, so you'd have to be rather well. It's in the Gita, Bhagavad Gita, that to control the mind is everything, and Arjuna says to Krishna, look, I can't do it. It's harder to control than the mighty wind. But Arjuna replies, he said, no, with practice, you can do it. It's what the common phrase has said, mind above matter, isn't it? And some people have an extremely strong will. They'll hold a view. They're going to be a good something or other. It might be a motorcyclist. It might be, a saint. It might be both. My friend seems to be both. And they pull it off. Extraordinary people. It takes a few years. It takes a lot of effort and focus of mind. But they're quite dynamic in achieving exactly what they wanted. Perhaps not exactly. It got modified along the way. They might have started off with go-karts or something, and they ended up with Formula One racing cars, but whatever it was. Or they might have started just doing well at school and then become, the greatest philosophers, logician on earth for their century or something. And you think, whoa, what a successful person. Well, it's because they've got this incredible focus and volition and will to pursue a goal. It's as if they focus all their abilities. It doesn't get dissipated. It doesn't get discouraged. It has an incredible self-confidence that it's going to achieve what it values. It wants it so much, nothing else will do. Nothing else will do. My soul longs for you. Nothing else will do, Lord. Nothing else will result. You've got this fantastic spiritual soul. A miracle worker. I mean, ideally. Well, ideally, if what he's willed is good as we all see it. If you see what he's willing as evil, well, my goodness, he needs to be dealt with. What do we do, And that's what persecution's about, isn't it? In the world you will have persecution, of course, because all these children are battling with the same sort of dilemma of what's reality and what's something I can achieve despite reality or with reality. And they're finding ways of achieving what they achieve, and they're being altered in the process because they're subject to their environment. And that's nothing new, is it? You could have told me that. So choose your company carefully. Choose your thoughts incredibly carefully. Meditation, prayer, spiritual reading, spiritual pursuits are ideally exactly that practice. Choosing what you understand to be truly good. Worshipping your God, loving your God, and living according to that love in as harmoniously and successfully as you can. Bless you. Bless you. Thank you, Dad. So what have I done here with the recordings of today, 02, June the 2nd? I've gone through 5 recordings that build on repeating what went before, so that I'm entrenching this in my preoccupation of the mind, and I'm adding to it each time, getting clearer on what my preoccupation is to be as I read. Yes, I listen to A, and then B, and then C, and then D, and finally E. And F is an explanation of, in some sense, I see, or at least it can be used as a validation of, an explanation, a justification of the repetition in the previous 5 recordings that don't just repeat but actually add on each time. I've simply attempted a mechanism that might capitalize on this understanding, haven't I? That if we hold the thought long enough, it becomes much more effective. We consolidate it in our mind and we build on it, and it becomes more of a reality. It's just another aspect of sort of mantra, isn't it? Except it's a very extended type one, where there's an extended story or discourse which is repeated and repeated. A bit like the people say the Lord's Prayer, perhaps each day, Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, and so forth. And they say it each day, or they have a favourite text. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he will direct thy paths. And they say this to each other, to themselves and each other regularly, perhaps. And it reinforces and gives them an expectation that starts to become apparent and played out in their consciousness and in their life and in their daily activity. They start to be sensitive to when they've asked for something, and God seems to just lead them to it wonderfully. And they start to feel the reality of what they're wanting to trust in. So what we're saying is cardinally important, your control and direction of the mind and to what it is being directed to. Not instant necessarily whilst you're in much chaos and confusion and variety of thought, but as you start to hone in and concentrate and focus the mind, the more it affects your life, who you're becoming, what you're living, and your entire being, who you're becoming. That, yeah. Now, you might be blessed with an extremely repetitive job that requires almost none of your concentration. For argument's sake, it could be cleaning, or it could be planting or agriculture, where you do the same repetitive task 1,000 times, It doesn't require the thought. So your thoughts can be available to be used in this incredibly constructive way. You might, on the other hand, be in such a demanding situation like some forms of computing, actual programming where things are unique and so on, or more so, and it requires your thoughts. It demands your thoughts, and doesn't leave you this opportunity to be wonderfully spiritual. Retirement, of course, is an incredible opportunity, but you may just lose motivation and reason and so on for doing it. You may become sluggish and simply dull. So in the Gita, there's sort of three sorts of persons. There's the sluggard who's got no motivation at all, poor chap, just sitting there in a heap of delusion and virtual depression. He's subject to whatever thoughts seem to crush in on him from the world around him. Others who are Rajas sort of spirit, they're the kings and fighters. They have purpose and they're striving for something that's possibly not too enlightened. They want power and possession and experience of the transitory. And there's others who are a Brahman sort of higher order of concerned with what is fundamentally of peace and goodness and consistent value system and lasting joy and life eternal, if you like. And you can be anywhere on this spectrum, can't you? And the spiritual life is, of course, to shift towards the more spiritual, as we understand it, the more Brahman-like, the more godly. And the middle road is rather chaotic and tumultuous and disturbing and struggle of life. And the tamas, the darkness one, is just one of shutting down and death. In a sense, living death, perhaps, depression or not alive, not initiating that which is bringing you happiness and fulfillment and joy. But all this explanation and so on is but it's quite simply, whatsoever is good and lovely, think on these things. And where your joy will rise because of the good things that you're aware of, and you will reinforce the reality of such and become more and more sensitive as to such and how to achieve such, and just what it does constitute goodness and happiness and joy for you, and you're on the path to success, aren't you? You might be filled with such gratitude now that you're even more devoted to your wonderful God, who personifies very clearly in your mind, with consistency, all that's good, integrity, honesty, faithfulness, compassion, kindness, joy, peace, the list. And the more you focus on such, the more you find all these spiritual values start to increase: your faith, your trust, your hope, your joy, your persistence, your integrity, and so on and so forth. Not rocket science at all. Bless you. Thank you, Dad. Well, but to point out, therefore, I bring words of peace. Where there's discourse, I bring harmony. I either shut down the opportunity for harmful discourse, or I inject it with and add to it all goodness, good words, kind, that which brings loving goodness and peace and joy and truth and all good thoughts. That's what I try to supply. not antagonism and criticism and negativity, but positivity. Well, of course, that would tend to bring blessing, wouldn't it? And probably would tend, not necessarily always, but tend to bring good response from others. It does depend on how they see it, though. And in the world you will have tribulation from time to time, but be of good cheer, says Jesus. I have overcome the world, which means you can overcome the world. It's possible. And you might not see that as very possible if really you're seeing Jesus as God visiting the earth, whereas you're just man on the earth, man or woman. But if on the other hand you see Jesus as your example and what's possible for you, in other words, you see him as your friend, not as your God, except in as far as perhaps he personifies the way, how to achieve what you wish to achieve, which is the loveliness of your God. Then, when I say to you, we are Jesus, it has a good meaning for you, as opposed to something that should inflame you to persecute me for having the wrong faith. It's best if I don't say this to you, because that would give very bad response, and not particularly bless you either. On the contrary, turn you into a rage and me into being subject to your rage. So you're wise as serpents. You don't deliberately stir them up unless you need to stir them up. And it's clear in the Jesus story, he was pursuing being crucified. I mean, to the extent he even says, look, I've got 12 legions of angels could come to my rescue if I so chose. But that's not the will of my God. So, from the story point of view, the will of his God had something very worthwhile in mind by being crucified. And that's sort of a bit hard for many people to accept. And, well, it's not a problem because it's probably just a story. But perhaps the story is teaching us something that is very important. Yeah. Perhaps that some difficulties are worth taking because, as you understand, that the gains are wonderful. And perhaps it is the case, isn't it, that but for the story ending in a crucifixion, perhaps many people down the ages would not have noticed the story. It wouldn't have got their mind wandering and who was this man and so on in the story. What a strange hero. What's this about? I take consolation in it being a story because I can't bear to think of such a wonderful person being harmed in this way, crucified, and in fact I can't bear to think of anyone being crucified, though I know from an historical point of view that it has happened. I certainly don't dwell on it. And I don't find it helpful to dwell on him being crucified either. It's achieved, the story, the crucifixion in the story has achieved getting my attention, but now my attention is to all this goodness, not this appalling picture of suffering. But some people find the appalling picture of suffering a great help in motivating them to love and follow God. It's not been quite my experience. My experience is to be that it's questioned a God that would do such a thing and allow such to happen to his son. Not sure if this is my God, all-powerful and all-loving. But that's just my view. Just as you have also just your view. What I'm saying is choose a view that is the greatest blessing. It's hard to argue against that, isn't it? It's just trying to determine which view is the greatest blessing. And that's going to be from your point of view? Interesting dilemma while we're here in the world of uncertainty, isn't it? In the world of good and evil. And so we're commanded to love each other, and we're not quite sure how to do it, but and it doesn't really make sense, the command anyway, but we do take it as a principle that it would be good if we could love each other. How can we bring this about? How can we be a true blessing to each other? And each of us thinks we've got some handle on this. And what I'm saying is we need to pursue that understanding that we have individually with all our heart, soul, mind and strength, and quickly put it right by such experience of doing so. And we start to see God in a more consistent and wonderful way, and our values shift accordingly, which is, as I understand it, who we are, what our values are, and are becoming. And so we're, in a sense, maturing to adult spiritual life, that I take it to be making us fit for the kingdom of heaven, a freedom with our Heavenly Father that is a great blessing to all. That's the ideal that I'm conceiving of and trying to move towards. And perhaps you are too, although we might not agree on the details. We'll try to be tolerant of each other so that we bless each other as much as we can. Bless you. Thank you, Dad.